instead of ourselves. When he left, we had a driver, and we were talking to him, and then we came back later, and we talked to people in the hotel. Everyone in the hotel said the same thing about him, from the woman who swept the floor to the manager of the hotel, that he was the kindest person they had ever met. And that started me thinking, isn't this what the Yoga Sutras is supposed to be doing for us? To make us this kindness that is unmistakable wherever you go. People feel that, and when they feel it, they don't say, oh, this is coming from this. What we feel is a heart-to-heart connection, which to me is the essence of the Yoga Sutras. This is the power, and as I've called it, the secret power of yoga, is to understand that we are not different. So all the terms that we use, all the samadhis, all the terms that are being used so beautiful and so much explanation, our experience of that when we take it in is to love the person sitting next to you. Not because we're supposed to, but because we can't help it. It's us. We're not loving someone else. We are loving ourselves in the highest sense of consciousness. So to me, the examples that we are being given in the world, these great saints and sages who come to us in their simplicity and tell us, just love each other. Someone else did that about 2,000 years ago, I think. They said something like, love thy neighbor as thyself. Wasn't that something catchy like that, right? What does that mean? It means what we're talking about, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about the essence of who we are. The essence, not to say don't do this, don't be violent. It's saying instead, love, be kind, be compassionate to everyone. That to me is the essence of the Yoga Sutras and how it is portrayed. The other thing that I think seems to be separating us, along with the idea of the yamas and niyamas, is that we are beginning to splinter yoga as all the religions have splintered. Very funny to me when people talk about an ecumenical program, which means different kinds of Christians coming together to talk. They all believe in the one, in the same. And I see this happening in yoga. The Yoga Sutras were meant, to me, to unite. It's the second sutra that talks about the union. Why would we then separate and take it, oh, I just do asanas, I just do this? What happened to the whole? And that's why I've always said yoga with a capital Y, to have that. It's a little bit like going into a forest. We all stand separately as trees, but if you go just a few inches under the soil, you'll see that we're all interconnected. If we continue to see the separateness, we are identifying with the body, not with the spirit that lives in the body. So taking these examples and using, yes, the intuition. The intuition will really touch us and tell us what is happening. What is our barometer? How did I act to that person? Do I need to get quiet again and spend more time with my spirit? Why are we so afraid to be quiet? What is it? Do you know, and I don't know about other countries, but in the United States, the worst punishment you can give someone is not death, right? What is it? Solitary confinement. They have rules about how long you can stay in solitary. Why is that? We can't stand being with our own minds, right? What I offer you is go to your heart instead. Can you be with your own heart? And then when you're there, can you then be with other people's hearts? That is my question. When the sutras, especially yamas and niyamas, were translated or are continuing to translate and using this negative, what we find, and psychology will tell us this, anytime you add a not or an un, the human mind does not experience it. And this came out a few years ago, very funnily, I think, on dieting. People were trying to diet, they still are. It's very interesting. Everybody in this country is trying to diet, and other countries are trying to get enough to eat. A little bit of a heart pull on that one. So people were doing things like writing little sayings on the refrigerator. And they said, "I will not eat between meals." Great! So every time they started, "Oh, I will not eat between meals." Or was it? The human mind did not see the not. People were gaining weight and they couldn't figure out why. "I will eat in between meals" came out of that instead of not. So be very careful when you're doing these wonderful practices and wonderful attributes not to use the not. Not to use the not. Right? So ahimsa does not become non-harming or non-violent. It becomes having love and compassion, respect for all, everything. From this Swami Vivekananda, great poet also, he said, "To those that lowly creep, I am the self in all." Okay? Everything is our brother and sister. Why take this amazing concept and make it into a non-violence, non-harming? Getting back to the Dalai Lama, he's always said, "Oh, he's non-violent." Can you imagine he's getting ready to go on and give a teaching, and he's sitting in the back and he's saying, "Okay, no, I'm not going to be violent. I'm not going to go out there and be violent," right? It's preposterous. Yet, why do we do this with something like ahimsa? Ashdeya, non-stealing? Really? Non-stealing? What's the opposite of non-stealing? If you weren't stealing, what would you do?
Giving.
Giving. So you'd be generous, right? Why not say that? Why not say, when you live in generosity, aparigraha, another one, non-greed. If you believed in abundance, you would never, ever be greedy. You know the next one is coming and is even better. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's just reorienting our thinking to be able to use these in a very, very powerful way. To use them in a way that will heal, which is the ultimate samadhi, not only us, but the whole world. The whole world. What's the use of sitting there reading them when someone is hurting? Because to me, the Yoga Sutras do something very extraordinary. They bring together the head, the heart, and the hand. Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga. And when all three function, we can really say to ourselves, we are in yoga. We are in a state of yoga. It's not a practice, it's a state. We live that way. It's not that we decide whether we want to give a coin to someone begging on the street. We have no choice. Our hand is in our pocket and we are giving because our hand is connected to our heart and our head. This to me is the incredible beauty of this practice. When we were talking also, by the way, in Los Angeles during that time. We had the Intrical Yoga Institute. And they actually called us from UCLA to do a study on us at that time. They took 3 groups. They took Zen, TM, and Intrical Yoga at that time. And I tried to tell them that TM was the same as yoga, but they didn't want to hear it. And what they did is they hooked us up. They hooked us up. Oh, you had to be meditating at least 5 years. And they wanted to see what happened with our brain waves, with our perspiration, with our heart rate, etc. And they were surprised. They were surprised to see how the mental and heart level vibration went down during meditation. They've been looking at this because the world is fascinated by what came out of India. The world is fascinated by the yogis that have been buried in the ground. What were they doing down there? What was happening in their minds and their hearts? Nothing. They were in a state of quiet, of calm. When we talked about Paramahamsa Yogananda before, one of the lines from his description of Svadhyaya was so beautiful to me. It stayed with me for many years. Still is. He said, Svadhyaya, when you have read a line from a scripture and have incorporated it into your life, go on to the next line. Many of us would still be on the very first sutra. With humility, we begin the sacred study of yoga. So we see that the practicality marries the understanding, and all this goes together and leads us to that place of samadhi. Can you be in a samadhi without being in a cave somewhere? Can you actually have samadhi while living in the world? I think so. I think it's the only way it can be, because at a certain point, even if you're in that cave, you have to get out. You have to serve. And how are you serving? Are you serving with the knowledge of knowing that everyone is the same? What's happening? How do we experience that? So think of that next time when you're reading a book. Don't just read it. Be with it. Meditate on it. Be still and find that in there. Find that peace. The quiet, which is so abrupt in our society now. No one's quiet. Everybody's walking around with earbuds. Everybody's doing this. What is happening? We're going the other way. It's no wonder that 20 million people are practicing yoga in the United States, because that's what they need. That's the opposite. That's the other side of this that's so crucial and so important. One of the reasons that I started writing this book, The Secret Power of Yoga, besides the students wanting it, and wanting another translation, another interpretation from a woman. It's a funny thing. I had many teachers, and Swami Satchidananda was definitely the key, but I had many other teachers, and one of them was a great Vedantic scholar from India. And I was at his ashram one day, and we were sitting there, and he looked at me and he said, okay, I know that you've just finished your study with heart patients that prove that yoga practice can reverse cardiovascular disease. That's amazing in itself, to think of it. Something like yoga can do that. He said to me, what are you doing next? And I kind of got very shy and gulped, speaking to this great scholar, and I said, well, we called him Shastraji. I said, well, Shastraji, actually, I'm writing an interpretation of the Yoga Sutras from a heart-centered, feminine perspective. And I kind of waited breathlessly. And he had his head down, he picked his head up, and he went, it's about time. So this is how that came. And, you know, I have gotten lots of feedback, not all positive, but people are reading it. They're reading it but wouldn't have read it before, and that soothes my heart. I see Patanjali as a reformer, and I see that many, many teachers have been that. Each age has to change it to some extent to adapt to the society that it's in. Otherwise, it becomes a dead scripture. We have to understand it from that way. And that idea that you asked about the testicles, sorry, but I've asked that question many times. As a matter of fact, my teacher used to always talk about the 9-gated city, how the scriptures describe the physical body. And I remember sitting there counting. And I got 10. So I went up to him, not in a group, but out to him afterwards. I said, Swamiji, you should say that. Why not? I said, because women actually have 10. And he said, That's how he answered a lot of questions. And he didn't pay attention to me. He went on to sing. And what happened was women started coming up to me. Are we not in the scriptures? Is this not for us? Should we be making something else, doing something else? So I think it's time for us to begin to make this into something that is not only palatable, but tasty, enjoyable. So everyone wants to put their finger in it and lick their finger. I want the Yoga Sutras. I want to learn about the Yoga Sutras. I'm not saying do this exclusively. I'm saying take all the translations and all the different interpretations, but please don't leave the heart out of it. The heart will give you the way when the mind has lost its way. Thank you. Do you want to do questions?
Yeah, we'll do a couple of questions, comments.
Easy ones, please.
Anna.
Mine is sort of a question, sort of a commentary, and sort of for both of you. I first of all want to thank you, Nischala, because when I first read your book, as a philosophy student, as a yoga practitioner, it really gave me a whole new understanding of relating to the Yoga Sutras in a practical way, in a way I could relate to it in a contemporary way. But it was also an example of the tension that someone like me lives in academia, because what you are doing is basically a different approach, right? In academia, many times we approach the text, or we want to approach the text and really figure out what it says within its own context, respecting the tradition, respecting the grammar, the where it comes from. But as a philosopher, I also wanted to know what the text says to me within my own context. So it's always the question of the audience and the authorship. Should we focus it on the author and the audience that author was referring to, or should we focus it now to this audience, to the contemporary audience? And so when we read the Yoga Sutras in this program, we read it through that perspective of yoga practitioners in the contemporary world, but also trying to read the text in its own context. The interesting thing is that most of the yoga practitioners right now are women. And here is my question to Dr. Timalsina and to both, because when we get to this point of the Yoga Sutras that talk about asam pranata samadhi, and we find this timeless state of mind, non-conceptual, everything that Timalsina just said. Many of my students said, well, but how can I relate as a woman to that state? Because if it's really this samskara which will wipe up all the samskaras, and I'll be there in that ultimate state for I don't know how long, how do I then go and feed and my kids, and how do I deal with my family? And so the question is, again, how do we read the Yoga Sutras? Because sometimes when trying to get the meaning for us, we might be reading things that are not in the text. And so if we keep doing that, then we perhaps, sometimes I feel that that happens, that we don't recognize the otherness of the text. But at the same time, we need to have it meaningful for us, for our practice today. So I want to ask you, Nischala, in your years of experience as an ascetic, I understand you had some years
Swami, yes.
as a Swami. How did you come out of that? And for Dr. Timasina, maybe the asamprajñata that we can experience today is just a mini asamprajñata, because we cannot really go to the cave like Hariharananda did, right? And that's really what could transform us today.
I totally understand what you're saying, and it's a conundrum in a way, because, and I think that's why the practices, the inner practices are so important, because we spend time in our own cave, we make our own cave, to be able to go out and then serve others. And when you were talking, the reason I was smiling is one of my favorite saints is Saint Teresa of Avila. I really loved her. And she was one of those very practical saints. She prayed, she spent a lot of time in her inner life, but when she was training the novices, and she would go into a state of samadhi, and she would actually levitate, and she would hold on to the frying pan, which in those days were only cast iron, very heavy, and she would hold on to it, and it would float up with her. And all the other nuns, the novices, they were very much enamored by this, and she would say, as she came down, and she came literally back to earth, she would say, "We have enough saints around here. What we need are some pot scrubbers." And really go in and do this. And this was her attitude, even though she had, and I quote, or paraphrase, I would say, from the Bhagavad Gita, where it talks about to have the hand in society and the heart with God. And I think that this is really, for our day and age, right now, we need spiritual people to be in the world. We need that, not just in caves, but to really relate. And if you should go into a high state of samadhi, which I'm hoping many people will and do, you bring that, when you go into samadhi and come back, you're never the same. It's never the same. It's a totally different experience because something has shifted. And with that inner knowing, just like the Dalai Lama said to me, when you experience that, you can't come back out and see people as other. And this will change everything. So not to fear, and a lot of women feel that. They say, I have my children to take care of. I can't go into samadhi. Well, there are certain kinds of samadhi that you can go into, even with children. But the important thing, I think, is the kindness.
Thank you, Anna, for interesting questions. And I know I have to blame my friend Philip Mas for just initiating this course in this direction of the testicles, you know. He brought another issue, though, that we have to read the text in their own context and not impose our contemporary context or philosophy into the text. And what I learned from his position is contemporary culture, societies, particularly Western society, is all about identity. It's the philosophy of difference. It's the absoluteness of our gendered subject. And if we were to argue that these identities are not real or not the subject of the discourse in Patanjali, but rather something sublime, then most of us may not even find that interesting. Because we are trying to discover something based on our own contemporary concerns. And for us, gender identity is the most concerned identity. And this comes from our own delusion, particularly in America, that we in America are in the optimum state of women liberation. And because it allows us to pick up one or two examples in the Middle East of some women stoning to death and ignore the inequality in payment in America. At least you women shut up, you are not stoned to death. What more do you expect, you know? And so, sorry to be so crude, but I love Mas when you brought that still thing, because one guru in India just about a month ago told his students, "What are you guys doing? Get rid of it." And 400 of his followers just chopped their balls off. This is a real thing, man.
Oh.
They cut it off. And it was all over the newspaper.
Did they want to be women? Is that why?
I don't know. I don't know why, but you know, now all this, I mean, I try to practice meditation, and in all my practice never thought about those. So now it's like after this, I think like the first thing I'm gonna think when I see, oh, I don't want to.
Well, it doesn't really put you in a state of bliss.
Anna, just to come to conclusion with your question, why I think practice can teach us not just that you, the practitioner, should just keep on your practice and gurus and forget about the books, but why we, the readers, should also pay attention to what is happening in the practical world. Why that matters is, I'm not in any way a serious practitioner. First of all, let me confess. My friend, Dr. Ramesh Rao, who is a renowned scientist in UC San Diego, developed latest software for the heartbeat rating and is already in market right now. When he was testing for the maximum amount of data, he asked if he could experiment on me when I'm meditating. I thought that's a silly idea, honestly, because I don't do those kind of breathing exercises or, you know, like asanas, or where I could believe that those just heartbeat monitoring would give any substantial data or difference, that's something we could observe. All I do is imagine, just you could call visualization or dhyana. And these are just one image after another image. It's not hallucination, it's not fantasy, it's just imagination. Nothing deeper is happening there. It's a pure imagination. So I told him, this is what I do, and I don't think that we are going to get any data out of it. He said, why don't we try? So in the challenge I gave to him is, I'm going to just go from one image to another for 15 minutes. If you can show me within 15 minutes 3 really reliable differences that you can objectively analyze, then I might think that your science can apply to my practice. And in all 3 different occasions, really I could myself see, and he later published, of course with keeping my name anonymous, that just what I imagine would also make a difference, not fantasize. If I start, you know, like getting aroused with fantasy, I could understand that. But just by changing one image to other image, that thing could be observed. So I think these things could help us understand the text better at one point. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, Peter first, then back there, and over here, and then we really have to go to lunch. Oh, we have to. Okay.
So, yes, I feel that my talk will be remembered as the one about testicles, which actually was not my intention. But I think I should try to contextualize a little bit what it was about. It was about assuming a cross-legged position in which the heels are near the testicles. And then afterwards, in pranayama meditation, it can happen that there comes an eruption in which the heels may move upwards. And that may hurt the testicles. So it's not a particular advantage to have testicles, but more a disadvantage, yeah, from the perspective of asana practice, in my view. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mine was really not a question, but a comment. I don't think you're rewriting anything. I think perhaps you're doing some unrewriting.
Yeah.
A comment to Nischala Joyde. From the Kaivalya Pada, the sutra reads Te Vyakta Sukshma Guna Atmana, and a movement toward from what is coarse and to what is refined, from what is a guna toward the soul. And a comment from Carl Jung, this is again a commentary from Jung from the Red Book, speaking to the heart. The knowledge of the heart is in no book, and is not found in the mouth of any teacher, but grows out of you, like the green seed from the dark earth. Scholarliness belongs to the spirit of this time, but the spirit in no way grasps Atma, the soul. The soul is everywhere, that scholarly knowledge is not. And of course, the greatness of Carl Jung is he was such a good scientist and such a profound scholar and writer. So with that paradox and the paradox of the desire arising in your stomach, I'm going to ask the speakers and the chairs and Jeff Ashton to gather here. And I want to introduce the others to the building. And there's a level here where there's coffee and snackables, and then there's a level above us that has vegan and stir-fry and Mexican and pizza and sandwiches and anything that your heart may desire or close to it, just above us. So if you take the staircase up and go down the hall, it's on the left. And then if the speakers could convene here, we'll be on our way as well. We'll meet back here a little bit after 1. I've also started to lay out some materials here, so you're more than welcome to come back, linger before you head out, and take a look. We have more books that will be coming either later today or tomorrow.